Hello, I am Sargon of the Fortress, and today I will tell you why I do not believe that racism requires power to be racism. Now, it is the common viewpoint among intersectional feminists and other social justice inclined individuals that racism is not truly racism unless power is involved. And this is, of course, applied highly inconsistently because the intersectional viewpoint very frequently collectivizes various races as whole groups rather than as individuals operating within what one might be considered a category or a group. However, from a more individualistic standpoint, would not be properly considered to be a real group in the sense of operating as a group. And a huge example would be, for example, the presumption that white individuals are, as a group, oppressing minorities in the United States of America. This, of course, would be an unjust accusation to place against white individuals in general. Why? Because not all white individuals are actively or even passively involved in oppressing individuals of minorities. And you may ask, how would this be provable? Well, first of all, if we operate on the presumption of innocence, then we would have to assume that in order for someone to be convicted of being discriminatory, that discrimination should be easily defined and proven in a court of law. Now, for example, let us assume that an individual from a minority received what would generally be considered to be a hate crime. And then we take a random white person to court. This would be unjust. Why? Because if it is a random white person, then we would not have any way to determine whether that individual is actually responsible for the crime. Now, if we assume that this person did indeed not commit the crime and that no evidence is therefore available to be placed against this individual, then it would be unjust to consider this individual responsible for a crime that he did not commit. Now, then, if we then extrapolate this to society as a whole, then we have to say that each individual is responsible for his own criminal conduct. And what does this mean? This means that all racial discrimination is accomplished by particular individuals, which means that there are also particular individuals who are not responsible in accomplishing this racial discrimination. So how does this go back to the original idea that racism does not require power? Well, because we also know that power is generally accumulated into the hands of particular individuals. Therefore, it would also make sense to assume that individuals who are not in power are therefore not in power, and therefore do not have any type of institutional power to lord over individuals who might be oppressed in a racial manner. What this means is that, in theory, those individuals, from a more critical racial theory standpoint, would not be considered to be oppressive because, in theory, they do not have power. However, this is not true, because it is very easy to find individuals who are not in any political office and who are not in a society that is encouraging of racial discrimination, and who generally would not be able to get away with such racial discrimination to still discriminate in a racial manner. What does this mean? This means that these individuals who, under a definition of racism that requires power, would not be considered to be racist are in theory still racist under a more classical definition of the term racism. However, this also implies to me that perhaps the definition of racism that requires power is indeed an inaccurate definition, because in theory, one might be able, for example, to murder someone for someone's race, and of course, in the act of murdering, one gains power over the other individual through violence and uses that power to cause a murder. However, if we assume that this individual did not have power before executing the act, then that individual would not have been a racist until he particularly chose to take that action, even if the action was in theory premeditated beforehand, and therefore the individual is not a racist when he premeditated his action, but therefore is a racist when he is doing his action, but is not a racist anymore after the action is accomplished. This also is illogical. So, therefore, an individual that still wishes to maintain the definition of power as part of racism should therefore understand that in theory everyone has power, and therefore everyone has a potential to be a racist under such a definition, because everyone could in theory become extremely violent and use the power to kidnap, attack, rape, vandalize, etc. for racial reasons, and therefore anyone can be a racist. Therefore, I believe that the definition of racism, including power, is not useful for defining what racism is, because in theory everyone has power, and therefore it is not acceptable as a category divider. But that is my opinion. What do you believe? Do you believe that this is an accurate interpretation? Do you have perhaps a rebuttal? Or do you agree? If you would be likely to, please leave a like or subscribe. That would be very helpful. If you wish to have a discussion, please do have a discussion in the comments section below, or attempt to contact me, and I would be happy to have a discussion with you. Thank you all for watching, and I will be seeing you all next time.